Welcome to Game Design Hour, the podcast where I interview the people behind the video games you love. On today's episode, I'm interviewing Isobel Shashas. They're the lead developer behind the video game Pupperazzi. Let's get into the interview.
Hello.
Hello. When did you first realize that you wanted to make video games?
I think it was back in high school. I loved exploring different worlds, and I got really into Battle for Middle-earth, had a worlds editor that came with it, and I couldn't ever figure it out to use it. Just me and my friends would mess around in that, and I really loved putting together worlds and exploring them. So say about middle school or something. And then I was like, oh, this is the only thing that I'm good at. So I'm just going to stick with this. And kind of through persistence ended up making a lot of games. Yeah.
After that, how did you first get into the video game industry?
Well, so I went to Champlain College. I was really lucky to be able to do. It's gotten progressively more outrageously expensive. Actually, before that, I went to a summer camp for game development that was in Unreal Engine 3, which I had also been messing around with at home. So a lot of not very fruitful screwing around in game engines on my own. I kind of taught myself how to program a little bit in high school. We didn't have programming class at my high school. The closest was robotics, which I did take. I actually ended up dropping out of Champlain right at the finish line. Literally, I have a general elective standing between me and a degree from Champlain that I just haven't ever gone back and done. So I started at Champlain in the game design major. And I actually ended up switching to creative media, which is a really cool major at Champlain where it's sort of an open-ended art major where you can basically build your own curriculum in terms of what you want your work to be. I was super lucky that I was able to work on Diaries of a Spaceport Janitor at Champlain for credit, basically. And while I was there, I met the people who I ended up starting Sunday Month with, and we were given some advice from different faculty and staff in terms of how to start our business and get the paperwork side up and running. And yeah, we were able to start the company through Champlain. So I would say mostly it was just I really wanted to make games. And so I found other people at Champlain who also just wanted to kind of go out and make our own games together. And because we were at Champlain, we were able to do that. So the education from Champlain was very valuable, of course, in terms of actually breaking into the industry. I think it was just the fact that we were all there together at the same time, and we could get the support we needed to start a company and be able to work on stuff for the company for school, which all kind of happened. So it definitely took a lot of financial stuff that we don't tend to talk about as much in the game industry, but it's very important. A lot of us had student debt and we were at a very expensive school. And if those things didn't happen, then we probably wouldn't have been able to start a company. So
how did you first come up with the idea for Pupperazzi?
We spent a lot of 2018 kind of in a weird spot as a company. Basically, we had started and canceled a couple of projects, and we were juggling working on internal games with doing projects for clients. So we were doing a lot of contract work. And by this point, we were around 11 or 12 people full time. So there was kind of a lot of momentum where we were okay, we need to have something to work on. And so we basically came up with the idea for Pupperazzi in a meeting where we had just canceled a project and we were really desperate to finish something and to make something. And so we were what kind of game do we want to make? And let's try and make it in 2 weeks. Anyone who's made games will probably not be surprised to hear that it did not take 2 weeks. So we were Pupperazzi would be a cool competitive dog photography game. And you can have 2 players, split screen, and the goal is to take photos of the most dogs. Which is very different from what Pupperazzi ended up being, of course. But yeah, so basically we spent 2 weeks, and then the 2 weeks turned into 2 months. And we ended up with a prototype that we really enjoyed playing, and it was fun to take photos. And we were surprised by how much fun it was to look at the photos afterwards and be oh, I really like this one. And we were we could totally build an entire single player game built around this. So we decided to restart the project. I think it might have been Bradford Horton apologies if I'm misremembering that. One of our designers and like writers who came up with the concept, and we kind of stole it and built the game.
What were some of the biggest inspirations behind Pupperazzi?
We were really interested by various Facebook groups and online communities that we had seen around like dog spotting. So it's like, you post a photo of a cool dog that you saw downtown. And on some of them, people will even like score your photo or enter heated arguments about whether or not it should be disqualified. And we thought that was like a very interesting subculture around like how they are scoring these photos and like what kinds of dogs are people looking for and all of that. And we all like dogs. No one on the team while we were making the game, I don't think like had a dog living with them. A couple of us have childhood dogs back at home or dogs that our parents have. We do have an office Roomba who is in the game, who is the closest to our dogs being, that's not true. Campbell would tell me that it's very untrue because his dog, Harley, is very much in the game, the Dachshund. And I think there's a couple of other dogs that need it in. Definitely dogs in general, and like the love for dogs is something I think that people really attach to, and like that's definitely what got us to, like I said, reboot the project into a full game, is because we were like, these dogs are so cute and cool, and we can really connect with them like as though they were real dogs. So just like people's love for dogs, and then like more generally, we wanted something that would be like positive and refreshing and fun, that would just be really joyful and bring people happiness, and maybe not be too complicated sometimes. I think games like that are really valuable. Oh, and the photography element, of course, as well. Maybe not as much real world, but like the video game photography community is really, really interesting. As we were making the game, I got more and more curious about kind of like what kinds of players take photos and what kinds of photos do people like to take in games, because you might know like there's a whole scene of people who will like mod games and take really cool photos in them. And it's just like, it's a really interesting world for me, because like sometimes they lean into the trying to make it like the most photoreal image as possible. And then sometimes it's like documenting cool glitches or like things that you can only do in the video game. And I don't know, it's a very cool world. We try to appeal a little bit to players who might like that with some features in the game.
Are the different dogs in Pupperazzi based off of real dog breeds, or did you just mix and match different breeds to make fun creations?
Oh, yes, they're real dog breeds. Our artists did a lot of research. So Christy McCone did the dog models originally, and then Campbell Fletcher, also our lead artist, did more variations and dog color variations. And so there's like, I think 20, maybe a couple more or less different dog breeds in the game. And that's referring to like the dog models themselves. Those are all based on real dogs. And then for the color variations, each one has like 4 or more different color palettes. Campbell actually did some really exhaustive research on like dog genetics in order to learn about like how dog colors happen. And it's really cool and interesting, and he could tell you all about it, I'm sure. But like basically, there's a lot of very realistic color variations. And also by applying very different colors to some of the dogs, you kind of get like a mutt, like mixed breed feeling from some of them. So they don't all just look like purebred dogs. And then there's the silly, fun, super rare colors, which are not as realistic, but are very fun to find. If you can find like a solid gold Samoyed and various wacky colors. My favorite might be the cotton candy Dalmatian, which is just like got pink spots, and I think it's really cool.
You talked about research being done about different dog breeds. Was there any research done about cameras and lenses and film and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I was a big fan, and I was the only person on the team, but like I really wanted the photography element to be deep as possible while still being simplified and accessible. So the camera in the game doesn't work exactly like a real camera. There's a couple of liberties we took to simplify things. So you have like a lens that you can swap out with different lenses. Some of them are very silly. And then there's also film that you can collect. We chose not to have filters in terms of like Instagram filters that you apply after you take the photo. And instead, that's basically different film. So it's kind of draws inspiration from like film treatment processes that basically like after you take a photo on film, you can run it through different chemical processes to get a different look, and it'll like change the colors and like compress or expand like dark and light areas. And so we were kind of like, what if we take all of our filters and use them as film? So you collect a film that's like black and white only, or film that's like rainbow colors or whatever. And what that does is it kind of forces the player to commit to the look that they want before they take the photo, which I found really interesting. I don't know, it's a different mindset than like just swapping out Instagram filters afterwards. The inspiration that we took and the research was for like swapping out camera parts.
Managing scope is a very important part of game design. How did you work to manage the scope of Pupperazzi, and how did it change from when you first started to what you have now?
It changed a lot. And I would say that I didn't do a super great job. One of the other owners of Sunday Month and I actually did a postmortem talk for a local game group called Rad Magpie, which I think will be on YouTube soon. But basically, we talked about the production process and kind of like specifically how it ended up being very chaotic. So we spent 3 years on this game. Like I mentioned, we were in a spot where we were balancing contract work with our internal games, and we were really desperate to finish and ship something. So basically, to summarize some things from that, we had one problem where we had folks coming on and off the project because we had other contract projects that needed attention. And so balancing our focus between Pupperazzi and other projects became really difficult. We also had like 2 other big game projects at Sunday Month during Pupperazzi's development. So that didn't make it easier. We ended up in this kind of cycle where we would miss deadlines because we were moving people on and off the project, which would kind of lead to like uncertainty about the project's vision, or like the entire process, which would in turn kind of make it so that we never had time to step back and really evaluate our production process. So basically, like, we never gave ourselves the chance to sit down and like take a breath and be like, okay, what does this game actually need? How are we going to get to a finished version of this game? And the real problem is that we were stuck in pre-production and we didn't even realize it. So pre-production being a phase where like the game is just a hot ball of magma and could change dramatically between like different concepts. And as you progress, like basically the game gets more complicated and you have to kind of commit to a direction and switch into full production. Basically, we didn't realize that in order to do that, you need to have really concrete answers to various design and technical questions. So we were in a spot where even late into development, we were making big design changes because things weren't working. So a specific example of that is like the UX, the UI flow. We redesigned the menus of Pupperazzi, like not exaggerating, like literally 10 times, changing the entire core experience. So in the game, there are missions. Different characters will ask you for photos, and your objective is to fulfill them. Basically, early on in the game, you would have to go into a level, do like a couple of missions, and then leave the level in order to cash them in, basically. And this just basically put the player through a ton of different menus. They were like, why are we in menus so much? Like, I just want to pet the dogs. And we eventually moved that to being a menu that you can access from inside the levels. We still even get players who are like, oh, there's too many menus and I just want to hang out with the dogs, but it's way better than it used to be. And unfortunately, that like took like 2 years, like 2.5 years to figure out even. And so things were coming together very late in the process. So it's hard to say exactly what we should have done differently. There are a couple of takeaways, like don't try and balance contract work with internal projects, or at least be aware of the risks of that. Know if you're in pre-production or not. Like a red flag would be like if you're throwing away a lot of work. We had levels that we fully redesigned and threw out a lot of artist work. We had, like I said, we redid the menus like a dozen times. That was a lot of work that got it felt like it got wasted. It was still building towards a better product, but it's very demoralizing to be like, I just spent 3 months implementing these cool UI transitions, and now we're redesigning all of the menus, and that's all going to get deleted. So that's a red flag that you're still in secret pre-production. In terms of how we managed the scope, we didn't do a great job because it's really hard. And I think that's okay. There's probably a balanced approach where there's always going to be guesswork involved, but maybe you're just really aware of the risks. Fortunately, it worked out with Pupperazzi. We got very lucky in terms of the game's launch. And our partners, we worked with Fox Games, and they were amazing. They gave us some really helpful advice, mentoring, and guidance. But it was definitely a difficult process. And there were times when it was really hard for everyone. I think that's important to know, is that it can be really chaotic.
Were there any big or interesting bugs that you and the team came across while working on Pupperazzi?
Many, many bugs, for sure. There were some scarier ones. So crashes are very spooky. And unfortunately, we did have some issues with crashing on Xbox at launch. And it's been a slow process to get those fixed, especially because we're not doing the port directly ourselves, working with a partner who has been really, really great. And the porting process has been kind of a new adventure for us and really ended up being kind of difficult to handle. But in terms of bugs, there were some weird photo glitches. There was one point when we were testing on a specific graphics card, and the photos would just be completely garbled and glitchy, but then sort of, I don't even know what was happening. It was you'd get the outlines of all of the polygons, but then the interiors were just noise. And it made these really beautiful glitch art, weird alien photos. There were some times when you take a photo and it would just be neon green, radioactive booger, explosion in a photo. Those are some cool but scary bugs, because that's the kind of thing where it's I have no idea how to fix this. It's that's something that's going wrong way down on the hardware level, and I have no clue. My skill level isn't, my knowledge is not in that area. So it was always kind of just to cross your fingers and pray that this isn't going to happen. And then persistently throughout the entire game's development up until the very end, when Ben made some heroic efforts to improve it, Ben Saranko, one of our programmers, there were consistent issues with the game not knowing what was in a photo or not. So it's actually a pretty complicated thing to take a photo in a video game and have the game know what you just took a photo of. Because the game, humans are super good at pattern matching, right? That's why the CAPTCHAs make you match images, and the computers are not good at that. So we tried a couple of different approaches in order to get the game to recognize what's in the frame. We ended up going with this might be very technical, but there's a mesh collider on the camera frustum. So it's kind of a trapezoid shape. And then that sweeps around the scene and records what it overlaps with. We have little colliders on all of the things that we want to recognize a photo of. And so basically it's continuously doing a check, a collision check, to see what's in there. And we use the physics system for that, which might not be the best approach, but it ended up being what worked for us. But yeah, there was always oh, I took a photo of this thing and the game thinks that there's no dogs in it. Or you take a photo of exactly what the photo mission needs, and it's oh, you forgot to take a photo of a dog. And it's there's a dog right there. Or vice versa, when it's there's nothing in this photo, and the computer is wow, I really love how you captured that human. And stuff like that. So that was endless.
How large was the team that worked on Pupperazzi?
Like I mentioned, the Sunday month team was 12 or 13 people. 11, it was about that. It fluctuated a bit because we had a certain number of people who were full-time employees, and then we had some people who came on and off different projects, and we had a lot of different projects at Sunday month during the course of Pupperazzi's development. In terms of how many people like actually touched it, I think there's like 15 people in the Sunday month and credits. But then there's also Kitbox team, Plastic Fern team who helped us port, who did the porting work. And then our testers who are invaluable and who there are like, I think probably dozens of. And we did testing. The testing was like a really good process for us, actually, really valuable. So what we did is Ryan, who is one of the owners of Sunday Month, ended up starting a new company during Pupperazzi's development. And through his company, we hired folks to do QA testing in small batches, basically. So we'd have like 4 people in a night, sometimes even like 2 or 1. We tried to do it like every 2 weeks. We would do play testing, but this didn't start until halfway through development, which was very late in the game to be doing it. Every 2 weeks, we would do some play testing, and we would ask folks to record their session, both their screen and ideally their camera as well. And just that was hugely invaluable. Like compared to doing in-person playtest sessions, I would say it was way better because what we could do is take that footage, we put it on YouTube unlisted, and just like we can scrub through and like take notes together or be like really reverse engineer on a second to second level what is going through someone's head when they're like confused or when they hit a problem. And that's how we ended up converging onto the final design for the game that works the best. And we could have gotten there a lot earlier if we had just done that sooner. And on top of that, we had some testers who went really above and beyond in like understanding the design of the game and providing super great feedback and just like really good design input too. Huge shout outs and love to all of the game testers, of which, like I said, there are many. So it ended up being a lot of people end up touching the production of the game.
What was your process for designing each of the different areas?
Really fun, but also tortured and chaotic. This is one of the things where like we started way too early in some ways, like week 1 of the reboot. So like I mentioned, we had the original prototype of the game and then we kind of restarted it. Like right at the start, we were doing level prototypes. We had like 4 different levels that we were doing at the start. We didn't even have like the game design, like the core loop or any of the core mechanics implemented, which was too early. So we ended up doing some cool work in that phase, but it all got thrown out. And only the basic concepts of those maps ended up carrying over. Like it was good because our level designer got some extra experience and some extra opportunities to work within the engine, but it wasn't great from a production standpoint. So after that, we tried a lot of different iterations in terms of level design process. We threw a lot of stuff at the wall to see what would stick. I'm not sure how successful we were in the end, but basically what we would do is we come up with the idea for the level, and then, which we had, I think, all the concepts very early in the process. And then what it would be, we would do a 3D concept in Unity, just using like cubes. We would kind of massage the 3D concept a little bit, and then our artists would come in and do art on top of it. Each of the levels kind of had a different version of this process because we were changing it throughout development. And secondly, like all of the levels went through a lot of iteration, and yet paradoxically, like maybe not enough iteration, where like the oldest level is the boardwalk. That was like very early on, we had kind of the shapes of the boardwalk and we would like move big chunks of it around, but it quickly sort of solidified. And then like with Mellowstone, the nature park, we tried to do something a little different where like we would make like prefabs out of just cubes and stuff in Unity and then place those around in order to make the basic shapes. And then we gave those prefabs to our artists, who then made arted versions of those. I would say neither of those processes was ideal. I was talking to Campbell about just kind of looking back on the game, and he pointed out that we never did like concept art for the levels and how valuable that could have been, like just to see kind of the art direction up front of like what this was supposed to look like. In some places, especially on Mellowstone, we ended up with like very complex, huge meshes that are very hard to edit. So once our environment artists left the project, we couldn't make changes basically to some things. Like we couldn't like stretch or or change the shape of rooms because they were all one big piece. Like it might have been better to work from a kit where like we have our environment artist give us pieces of the level and then we assemble the level out of those. Yeah, it was very like, we kind of just tried a lot of different stuff. And we learned a lot. And I think the levels did come out very good. But it was through a lot of effort, basically. We had to really kind of take a hacksaw to them sometimes, especially like the city changed very dramatically from where it started. And a lot of that was just like having long discussions about like, hey, should we maybe move the cul-de-sac? Or like, should we change the shape of this thing? And at a certain point, it's just like, you kind of have to try stuff out. But yeah, they're very complicated. There's a lot of different meshes. If you think about the city, there's like buildings and then all of the windows and doors and railings and benches and bushes and trees and fences and sidewalks. Those are all different meshes. And so it's tough to just like move stuff around, which is what you end up doing a lot. I don't know if there's a great answer for it, but that's what our process was. It's kind of spaghetti.
What was it like working on Pupperazzi during the pandemic?
The pandemic definitely affected the project very heavily. So coincidentally, we were going through a huge transition phase right at the start of the pandemic. We had realized that balancing contract work with our internal projects was not going well. My relationship with the other owners had gotten really strained because there's a lot of pressure on us, which we had put onto ourselves in signing up to run a company, which is a huge responsibility. And basically it was proving very difficult. And we made the call to stop doing contract work at Sunday Month, which cut off our income stream basically. And we were like, we're going to focus on the game. And if we can be profitable and make money, then we'll keep going. And if not, we'll just do this one game and we'll see what happens next. And March of 2020 was actually the end of our runway for Pupperazzi as a full team project. So months before then, we had a lot of deep conversations with the whole team and let everyone know what we were thinking, told everyone what was happening, gave everyone as much notice as possible. And we basically had like planned to pretty much lay people off at like around then. Ryan through Weathered Sweater was, we were moving our contract projects to Ryan's new company, basically. So folks were going to keep working on those projects at Weathered Sweater. But in terms of Sunday Month, we were winding things down, basically. It was ironic that it happened right at the start of the pandemic. And that was super difficult, of course. I myself was a complete wreck for like the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, or of lockdown, I should say. I was not very helpful as a project leader in that time. And Ryan kind of had to step up and help people navigate. And then from there, I mean, like I said, we had we had planned this transition basically where at first, in late 2019, we were like, we're going to be finished with the game. It's going to be done in March 2020. Or I think maybe it was April. And the game was not done by then. And as we got closer and closer, it became clear that the game wasn't going to be done. And we kind of shifted the plan to be, okay, I will continue to work on the project until it's finished after the team is offboarded. And that was a little better, but it was still like our planning was very much, we were making it up as we went. And we were still in this like kind of cycle of chaos, which worked out, I guess, in some ways, but was very difficult to pull off. And it was hard on everyone emotionally too. Right in March of 2020, we finished one iteration of the game. We had like the full game loop working. We thought a very early version of it. And it was kind of the first time that we could play test the whole game. And so we pivoted to Discord, where we had beta testers on our Sunday Month Discord play the game and give us some feedback. And so starting around then, we had like a meeting early into lockdown that was like kind of a wrap-up meeting. We did a post-mortem, what ended up being kind of a mid-mortem, where I was sure to ask everyone what they thought the biggest priorities for the remaining development should be. And then at that point, the project entered a pretty quiet phase. The whole the bulk of the team kind of went off onto different projects and worked at Weathered Sweater. We took down our office and we were, kind of going into hibernation a little bit. And I just got to work on the game on my own. That was still slow and chaotic. And of course, we went from 10 people to one person. So the pace changed. But I would say for me, it felt more efficient because finally I could just focus on fixing the problems at the core of the game design. Eventually, we did bring people back on kind of in set periods of time to fix specific problems or to help add stuff that needed to be added still. But for the most part, it ended up being just me and then our partners at Plastic Fern working on the projects up until launch. Ben came on, our other programmer, and did a fair amount of work in those stages as well. Yeah, so it was very different, not just because of the pandemic, but because of kind of the production process of the game. It was definitely difficult. And we had been working in person for the most part in our office. So it was a big transition.
What was the biggest design challenge you faced while working on Pupperazzis?
I'd say at the core of it, it's the problem of trying to strike a balance between creative expression and tying game progression into the photography mechanic. To put it another way, it's the player takes a photo and you can either be 5 out of 10, you get this much progress on your objectives, whatever. Or you can be that's a really cool photo. Let's celebrate this photo for being a cool creative thing. In a higher scope version of the game, we would have loved to do some sort of online sharing component where you're interacting with other humans and maybe judging or celebrating photos that other players have taken. Maybe there's online gallery of the most popular photos taken that week or something like that. That would be amazing. But we couldn't pull that off, unfortunately. So it's kind of if you over mechanize it, then players will be incentivized to kind of just go through the game robotically and take photos exactly of the Pokemon in the center of the frame and throw apples at it to get it to do the thing that you want it to do. And that's fine for kind of a scavenger hunt kind of gameplay, but we wanted to incorporate the creativity of real photography. And it's really hard to judge on creative stuff if you're a computer. I mean, it's hard enough as a person, right? We had no way of evaluating color or lines or composition from a computer's standpoint. So we didn't even try. We did try at some points. We messed around with a lot of different systems where it would judge based on how close the dog's face is to the center of the frame. We had a lot of different factors that we tried to bake into an artistic score for your photos. And it just never worked. It always pissed players off because they were I love this photo and the computer's telling me that it's terrible, or I didn't even try with this photo and the computer loves it. So I'm just going to spam the same photo. And yeah, it just didn't ever really hang together. We did end up doing something similar to that, but we switched from trying to evaluate the quality of a photo to only caring about what's in the photo. It's purely content. It's purely binary. It's different characters in the game will appreciate different things in the photo. So it's some characters really love sports equipment because they're sporty people. And so if you post photos of that stuff, then they'll like it. Even that system, I think players can see that it's a little bit shallow sometimes, and it was hard to build depth into it and make it really interesting. So we ended up kind of just trying not to put too much emphasis on it. It was a really difficult design question. And I think we got there in the end. It works coherently as a whole experience. Figuring out how to judge the photos was kind of the core cursed problem at the center of the game. And then on top of that, like I've already mentioned, we struggled with UI a lot just because the core game loop was so in flux. Early on, we wanted something. I designed something very narrative heavy and UI heavy as well. It would kind of have been you're surfing the web almost like Hypnospace Outlaw ended up being, but like different people on your pretend computer internet like want different photos. So you're like going onto like forums and posting your photos, and then like there was all of this stuff. It ended up being like a lot of wading through menus, and players just wanted to hang out with the dogs. So we streamlined it very aggressively. But that took a long time to figure out. Yeah, just like how do players progress through the game? How do we build tools to create this progression? You know, there's a lot of missions that feed into each other, but then also some missions you just kind of get from a pool. So the way it works under the hood is like every time you enter a level, the game will pick from a big bucket of missions. It'll pick like 5 of them or so, like a different number. And then you'll have access to those missions in your objectives menu. But then when you leave and come back, there's like specific missions are tied to like specific levels and times of day. And then sometimes they also have other conditions. So that ended up being pretty complicated as well. It's a simple seeming game, but like even the simplest game has like complicated moving parts inside it, you know?
Looking back now, what do you wish you could have done differently before the launch of Pupperazzi?
Tested it on an Xbox. At Sunday Month, we didn't have an Xbox. I'm ashamed to admit. We were working with Plastic Fern for the Xbox port. They, I want to emphasize, did a great job. And it was us at Sunday Month who weren't prepared for the porting process. So basically, we had never done a console game before. Even though things had improved, I was still in a state where like it's very hard for me to estimate like remaining time on a given task. Just like project management skills are things that I can still work on as a creator. And so what that boiled down to is like we were still changing things very late in the process, and Plastic Fern needed things to be concrete and set. And I was like, oh, I'm still working on the system, or like this last minute huge technical issue has cropped up that requires me to completely change the localization system. And all of the text in the game needs to be loaded in a different way. Anyway, like, yeah, we had to do a lot of changes, which made the porting process quite rocky. And unfortunately, like, we didn't test on a lot of different Xbox devices, and we experienced a lot of performance problems, but especially crashes on Xbox that players weren't happy about, that Plastic Fern had to put in a heroic effort to address and fix, which they mostly have. There are still a couple of miscellaneous crash reports that we're looking into, but it's at the point where like we don't have the resources to keep doing intense testing. So that's something I wish I would have done differently. But honestly, like Kitfox is extremely experienced and really like helped us in terms of launch, making sure it went smoothly. They did a phenomenal job with marketing. They helped us put together our launch trailer, which we did in collaboration. So like I did like almost a storyboard, and then they edited the final cut together. It was a joy to work with them. Tanya was very helpful and gave us some valuable mentorship. So that was great. Just like the final year of the project, it would have been great to realize like some of the scheduling. We ended up delaying the launch pretty late. So we had originally been trying to launch in early fall of 2021. And it wasn't until like October, I think, that or like September or October that I realized that it wasn't going to happen and told everybody. That is something that I wish had gone differently. But it fortunately didn't end up impacting things in terms of our revenue or how smooth the launch went too much. And we got in before Elden Ring, which is good because otherwise we would never have seen the light of day.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to a newer game dev trying to get their first game made?
I would say be very, very cautious if you're starting a company, as in think really hard about if you even want to. It's really easy to scale a team too fast. Like even on Pupperazzi. So like Sunday Month had been around for like 6 years at the time we started Pupperazzi, or 5. And now it's been 8 years since we started the company. So we had a lot of experience, and we had experience working together, and we had shipped games. Even then, like our team was very large. Like 12 people is a lot of people especially if you're trying to keep them all employed full time. That's a lot of money that it takes to do that. If you're just starting out, keep your team as small as possible for as long as possible. Make sure that you're on the same page emotionally and like on the same level, ideally, in terms of who controls the company as much as possible, because like sharing that responsibility can take a lot of pressure off of you. If I start another company, I'm going to try and do a cooperative style. I know that's not for everybody. Even just like pre-production on a game, like if you have 5 artists who need work to be doing and you don't know what the core game loop is yet, that's going to be a very difficult question to resolve. So maybe those artists can QA for another project or do testing or concepting, or maybe just go off and do a game jam, or maybe you even just give them a paid vacation. And that would be more efficient than having them work on a project where their work is just going to get thrown out. So yeah, be really strategic with that. It's kind of the core problem that we experience trying to run a company is like finding work for people. If you're going to get a good game made, you have to be able to step out of looking at the priorities of the company or the priorities of the team members and look at the priorities of the game and what the game needs. And because like we were perfectly happy just spinning our wheels doing game development, even though the game wasn't really getting anywhere for a long time. Like it was eroding our production process and we didn't realize that. But like we were paying the bills, we were working on games that we loved. We were really stressed out and we didn't know why. But you know, it was working, which was the hardest thing about it, is because we had to be like, this is working for us as a company and us as individuals, but it's not working for the game. We're never going to get this game finished. And also we're all miserable because we keep having to do huge changes to the design and throw stuff out and cancel games. So
what's next for you? What are you working on now?
Still supporting Pupperazzi, still thinking about potential options to do with Sunday Month. But then I'm kind of taking a minute to take a breath and think about that question really hard. I'm picking up a new hobby. I'm going to do rollerblading. I'm really excited. And I have some other projects. I'm going back to my roots and messing around on little Unity projects. I don't know the answer to that question yet, which is very exciting.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And that's how the interview went down. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow or subscribe. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on Twitter, TikTok, or Instagram at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.